Alrighty, welcome everybody back to the channel. If you don't know who I am by now, my name is David. I also go by Miller Football, and today we're going to be continuing my series where I'm talking about all 32 teams and what they've done during free agency, the first week, stage, wave, whatever you want to call it. The most important part of free agency is over, so I'm going through division by division, grading each team based upon their additions, their losses, and their retentions. Before we jump into this, keep in mind that when I'm recording these, I'm dealing with a stuffy nose and some allergy symptoms. So if I sound a little bit off, I do apologize, but I'm working my ass off to try to get these done because people said they wanted them broken up into, a division by division breakdown instead of two big videos, one big video, whatever. So we're working. These are going to be my primary uploads over the next couple days. But with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump into it. Starting out with the Arizona Cardinals here, I think it's pretty apparent that they're looking more towards the draft to make their big moves this offseason, and rightfully so. This is a team that has, I think, 6 picks in the top 90, something stupid like that. So you've got plenty of capital. You got 2 first-round picks, one of which is the 4th overall pick. Like, I get wanting to prioritize the draft for the big names. So what did they do instead? Well, they went out, they added a bunch of, solid players at non-premium positions. I say a bunch. They added a couple. They added a couple pretty solid players at non-premium positions, and they kept a bunch of guys around. So let's go ahead and talk about what they actually did here. Starting out with my favorite move they made, and that's keeping around Greg Dortch. And I think this is because Greg Dortch is in for a much bigger role than what he's had in the past for the Cardinals. And maybe I'm projecting, maybe I'm being a little bit optimistic, but when you look at their receiver room, it's Greg Dortch, it's Michael Wilson, and then it's everybody else. And yeah, they're sitting pretty at number 4. They can take Marv and, receiver room becomes substantially better, but you're still going to run a lot of 3 receiver sets. You still need a slot receiver. And I think Greg Dortch can be the slot receiver for this team. I think he's a more than capable slot receiver. He's got the quickness you want. He's got the spatial awareness you want. He's got the vision you want if you want to run him on bubble screens or kind of use him a little bit like Rondale Moore out of the backfield, or, just getting him the ball right at the line of scrimmage and letting him run. He's really smart. He's really savvy. He's a very underrated route runner. I like Greg Dortch a lot, and I think if he's going to be your 3rd receiver, you're in a very good spot. Now, the Cardinals could go and rain all over my parade and draft Marv and then also draft a receiver with one of their other top 90 picks, but I don't know. For now, I'm going to pretend like Greg Dortch is going to be some massive impact on their roster, and even if they do draft 2 receivers, I'm still going to push my agenda, and you can't stop me, because I do legitimately think Greg Dortch can be a really good contributor for this team. And then also on offense, they bring in Jonah Williams from the Bengals, who, by all means, is a solid offensive tackle. He's not, like a franchise tackle, but for a 2-year deal, just to make sure Kyler stays upright, I'm rocking with it. I like it. You've got him and Paris Johnson as your tackles right now. They can hypothetically, they can both on paper, so I guess still hypothetically, but they can both on paper, in theory, play left and right tackle. So it'll be interesting to see what their combination is. I would assume they probably want Paris playing left tackle because they drafted him so high, but I'm pretty sure he played most of last year at right tackle, and maybe they don't want to move him around a whole lot. And maybe I'm overthinking the whole tackle thing, and they're just going to throw a wrench in everything and kick Paris into guard and draft the tackle with their, the 24th pick. I could also see that happening. I could also see this being like, we want to kick Paris inside. We need a Band-Aid to make up for that. So we're going to take Jonah Williams. And that would make a lot of sense to me. I'd be a fan of that. I'd also be a fan of it if they just stuck with these 2 as their 2 tackles. I think this is a really solid move. But, I can't complain. It's a solid move. He's a solid player. And then on the defensive side of the ball, they make 3 big additions. Justin Jones coming over for my Chicago Bears. This is an interesting one because while Justin Jones is incredibly solid, he's getting $10 million a year. An average of $10 million a year. It's a 3-year, $31 million contract. And that's just a little rich for what he brings to the table, in my opinion. I think he's a fine, quality defensive tackle. Probably not someone you want starting every play. And I guess that's probably why they bring in Bilal Nichols, but I think those 2 coexist on the field together, right? So, I don't know. I don't love the money they're paying Justin Jones, but I do really like the players, so it's not the end of the world there. And then Bilal Nichols, I like this deal a lot more. You're only giving him a 3-year, $21 million deal, so it's cheaper. I think he's better. I think he's a more versatile player. He's much better versus the run. He's a capable pass rusher. So I think those two are really solid moves. And then you also add Mac Wilson from the Patriots. He gets a 3-year deal, and he is, kind of a do-it-all off-ball linebacker, right? He's capable of rushing the passer. He can play the run pretty well. He's solid in coverage. And you add him alongside Kaiser White and Dennis Gardeck and Chris Barnes, who you also retain. I think the Cardinals are building a pretty solid linebacker room. There's no true standout superstar, but there's a lot of really solid role players, and in today's NFL, that's kind of all you need, right? So I like that move quite a bit as well. And then looking at the other moves they made here, just running down the list, you trade for Desmond Ridder. Sure, I think he can be a capable backup. You trade away Rondale Moore, who just wasn't meshing with your offense, I suppose. That's a fine move. You add in DJ Dallas after losing Marlon Mack. That gives you some depth at running back. I would say he's probably RB4 on the roster right now. I don't know if he'll make the final team, but, can't complain there. Chris Moore, solid receiver depth. You keep around some of your offensive linemen, which is fine. Evan Brown, I think he's going to compete with Yalti Froholt to be the starting center, assuming they make no other moves, and I think Evan Brown is capable of starting at center. You also add in Kairos Tonga, who was a very nice nose tackle. He's going to really step up as a run defender for the Cardinals next year, I would imagine, as a rotational defensive lineman. Like I said, you bring back Chris Barnes, you bring back Jesse Luketa, who played a little bit of fullback in camp. So maybe my pipe dream of every team having a fullback's getting a little closer with them wanting to keep around Luketa. But realistically, he's just solid depth. They also add in Sean Murphy-Bunting, who gets a 3-year deal. And full disclosure, I would have put him at the top of the graphic, like with the 5 players I highlight, but his name's too long and it wouldn't work, so I had to put him down here. That's full disclosure, right? But, I mean, you get a veteran corner who is certainly capable, because you look at the rest of this cornerback room, you've got Sean Murphy-Bunting, you've got Garrett Williams, you've got Keitrell Clark, and you've got Starling Thomas V. Like, it's not a room that inspires a lot of confidence at the moment. So adding Sean Murphy-Bunting, even if his health has been an issue, he hasn't played a full season since, 2020? I think he's a more than capable starter. I think he'll be a nice veteran to have in that room. I think he's just a good player to have. And to get him on a pretty solid deal, I think is a good move. They also keep around Bobby Price, who I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on or know much about. I don't, but it's always good to keep around your guys. I'm sure they brought him back for a reason. And then on special teams, you keep around Aaron Brewer, you keep around Blake Gilligan. Can't complain there. I've been a pretty big advocate in these videos for keeping around your special teamers as much as possible. Gilligan just came off an incredible season. 4th in net punt yards. It's the first time I've talked about punter stats, but he's relatively young. He gets a 2-year deal. I think that's a good move. But yeah, that's kind of it in terms of their additions and retentions. Looking at their losses, I'm not too worried about any of these. Like, you lose DJ Humphries, he's been on the team for a while. Jonah Williams is better than him, so you replace him, you'll live. And then Hollywood Brown, losing him sucks, but again, they're probably bringing in Marv, so you can stomach that. And other than that, I don't know. Maybe, Cardinals fans, let me know in the comments if I'm underrating anybody here, but like Lecky Fotu, sure, I'm not worried about Justin Jones, Bilal Nichols, all pretty comfortably better than him. But yeah, not a lot to write home about in terms of the losses. Nothing to grieve, really. So as a whole, I think the Cardinals did pretty okay. I'm going to give them a B, because I think this is about a baseline free agency period. They didn't do anything offensively bad, except maybe give Justin Jones $10 million a year, but I think they'll be all right. And you didn't do anything outstanding. It was just kind of, they made some solid moves. Like I said, they filled out the roster, added some solid talent at non-premium positions, apart from left tackle, because, left tackle is a pretty big deal. And yeah, it was solid. Nothing to write home about, but also nothing to complain about. So good work by the Cardinals. And the draft is going to be very, very interesting and very, very exciting for that fan base. Moving on to the Los Angeles Rams. This is obviously an offseason that's probably pretty hard to enjoy as a Rams fan, as Aaron Donald did unfortunately retire. And I know he's been teasing it the last couple years, he's been alluding to it, but like, yeah, as someone who's not even a Rams fan, just as an NFL fan who grew up in the midst of Aaron Donald's dominance, it's tough. If I'm upset about Aaron Donald retiring, I can only imagine how it is for Rams fans. So getting that out of the way. I'm trying to find a positive here. I'm trying to stall so I can think of something nice to say. You guys have Kobe Turner now. That's a fun thing to say. Kobe Turner, he's not as good as Aaron Donald, doesn't play similarly to Aaron Donald, but he's a fun defensive lineman with a big, fun, wholesome personality, and he can sing. How about that? You go from probably the greatest interior defensive lineman of all time to a singing defensive lineman. That's got to be fun. It's got to be something. Hopefully that helps. I don't know if it does. I love Kobe Turner. I'll take any opportunity I can to prop him up. But taking a look at what the Rams actually did here, their biggest move in my eyes is retaining Kevin Dotson, who finally kind of caught on in LA last year. Was always pretty disappointing with Pittsburgh, kind of had his ups and downs. Comes to LA, he proves himself to be a legit guard in this league, one of the better guards last year. He's a legit mauler in the run game. He's a really quality pass protector. He's smart. He's a good communicator. Not afraid to get after. Like, he is an awesome guard to have on your offensive line. And then you also go out and get him a partner in crime in Jonah Jackson, who's going to play on the other side of the offensive line. And I mean, as a Bears fan, I can tell you right now, Jonah Jackson isn't fantastic, but he's a quality starter. You'll be fine. And it also gives you the opportunity to kick Steve Avila into center, which will be helpful. So now the entirety of your interior offensive line is shored up for the next couple years at least. Both Dotson and Jackson getting 3-year deals. So, that's solid. That's good work, right? I'm not going to complain there at all. And then we jump over to the defensive side of the ball for the other big moves here. And the first one I want to talk about is adding in Trey White, who gets a 1-year deal. And this could prove to be really good if Trey White can come out, stay healthy, and play even as like half of what he was when he was an All-Pro. This can be a damn good signing for the Rams. Now, do I think that's going to happen? I wouldn't put money on it just because he's been so derailed by injuries, and I'm not rooting against it by any means. I want Trey White to come out and kick ass. I've always liked Trey White, and seeing him on this decline has really sucked. And, I really hope he's able to kind of piece it back together with the Rams, because to see him be still relatively young, he's under the age of 30. He's 29. Yeah, he's 29. He'll be 29 for this season. Former first-round pick, absolute stud with the Bills, for a long time. Geez, I guess it wasn't that long. It was only a couple years. Oh, that's tough to think about, man. That just made me sad. I don't know why. In my mind, I always think of Trey White as like some dominant force for a decade. That's not the case. He had like 3 or 4 good years with the Bills, but hopefully there can be something there. Him and Darius Williams can come in and be a solid corner duo for the Rams, who have really been trying to figure out what to do back there since they got rid of Jalen Ramsey. So I guess that's only been a year too. Good Lord, these past 2 years have felt like a lifetime. But yeah, no, I like the Trey White move for them quite a bit. And then also on the defensive side of the ball, you add in Cam Curl from the Commanders. He gets a relatively cheap deal, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, 2-year deal worth $8.75 million. That can be worth up to $12.75 million with incentives. Super versatile guy, played both safety spots. He came up, played in the box, played linebacker. He's not super productive in terms of his ball skills, but he's a big upgrade over what the Rams had. You had Jordan Fuller, you had John Johnson. He's pretty comfortably better than them. So I like that move quite a bit. And then also you keep around Michael Hoyt, who was really coming into his own last year. Really, I say coming into his own like he's been in the league forever, like he's Kevin Dotson. He's going into what, year 3? Yeah, he's going into year 3. He's a capable player. I like Hoyt. It's always fun to see a big ol' edge rusher like that. That's just a good run defender. So they're big moves that I have laid out here. I think they did pretty damn good. You beef up the offensive line, you get some help on defense. And then some of the other moves here, you bring in Jimmy G to be your backup to Matt Stafford. Great work. I like that. He's a very capable backup quarterback for sure. What else do they do here? They add in Colby Parkinson. He gets a 3-year, $22.5 million deal. They needed depth at tight end. When Tyler Higbee got hurt, they didn't have a whole lot going on there. So they've got Parkinson. He's not a super productive guy, but he's a good depth tight end, pretty solid blocker. I like that move a decent bit. Hopefully he doesn't take too much away from my boy Davis Allen, though. I hope he can kind of get going there. And then on defense, Laryl Murchison, I believe is how you say that name. Defensive lineman. Laryl. I'm not familiar. I'm not going to pretend I am. And then Christian Roseboom is solid. He's a starter. He's proven that he can be a solid, kind of starting player, I guess. I don't know what to say about Roseboom. He's just he's a fine linebacker. Nothing too crazy to say there. And then Darius Williams, like I said, you bring him in. I think he's a very competent outside corner. Gets a 3-year deal. He's coming back to the Rams. I like what's going on. I like their additions and their retentions quite a bit. And then in terms of losses, genuinely speaking, the only things that worry me for them is losing Aaron Donald, which sucks, right? Losing Aaron Donald obviously sucks. We already talked about that. And then Coleman Shelton, but even then they're replacing him with Steve Avila, so I think they're doing okay. And even then, I think part of that is just me as a Bears fan trying to be like, yeah, we stole your center. I think you'll be all right. So, as a whole, I don't have any complaints with what the Rams did. I'm going to have to knock them a little bit just because of Aaron Donald retiring. That does, retirements do come into account with these. But I'm going to give them a B+. I think they did a fine job. I think Dotson and Jackson are going to make for one heck of a guard duo for them. I'm excited to see what Trey White and Cam Curl are going to do on their secondary. And yeah, I just think they did a good job of not losing too much talent, not named Aaron Donald, and just an overall solid offseason so far. Moving over to the San Francisco 49ers, they simply did not have a lot of money to shell out this offseason, which, that's what happens when you have a bunch of superstar players and you're making sure they're all paid pretty well. You're okay with that, right? You can stomach that. But that being said, they still made some pretty quality moves. A guy like Leonard Floyd, for example, coming over, I think is a fantastic fit for the 49ers. Sure, he's not the biggest or flashiest name. He's not even as flashy as Chase Young, the guy they ended up having to replace with Leonard Floyd. But I think he's a better fit for what the 49ers want. Yeah, Chase Young's probably the better edge rusher at this point in their careers. But Leonard Floyd isn't coming in to be a QB killer, somebody that's going to meet Nick Bosa at the quarterback every single play. His goal is just to be primarily a run defender and get into the backfield when he can. And Leonard Floyd is more than capable of doing that. He's one of the better run-stuffing, edge-setting edges in the league. And he's coming off a 10.5 sack season. Now, sure, that number's a little bit inflated because Von Miller was out, so he really had to step up. But, he's a capable pass rusher. Whether you want to say that number's inflated or not, he is definitely a capable pass rusher. And him opposite Nick Bosa for roughly $12 million a year over the next 2 years, not guaranteed, obviously, but that type of deal, I think is really good value. I think Floyd is definitely worth it. I think he's going to play up to that contract, and I think he's a perfect complement to Nick Bosa. And I gotta say, as a Bears fan, it makes me so happy to see Leonard Floyd carving himself out a role in the league. Yeah, I'm a little salty that it wasn't with the Bears, but seeing him, late in his career, really kicking off in his late 20s, now into his early 30s, establish himself as just a consistent second or third edge on some pretty good teams, makes me really happy. And on top of that, speaking of connections to the Bears, he's coming back with Brandon Staley, who he worked with the Rams and with the Bears. So there's some familiarity there. I can see why he would be a target for them. I love that move for them. And speaking of bringing in veterans, they also bring in Devondre Campbell at linebacker. He's going to primarily serve as your Dre Greenlaw substitute until you figure out what's going on with him, which, by the way, Godspeed. Hopefully he's able to heal up quickly. And once Greenlaw comes back, we're going to be optimistic. Once he comes back, Campbell can kind of slip over into your strong side linebacker role, your third linebacker that you don't have on the field as much, but is still a position of importance for the Niners defense. So, I like this move quite a bit as well. Another former NFC North talent maybe not what he once was, certainly not all pro Devondre Campbell or anything like that. But he's a capable starter. He's a good Band-Aid. And I'll tell you this much, he's better than Eric Kendricks, who they almost signed in place of him. I think they lucked out by Kendricks deciding at the last second, you know what, no, I want to go be a Cowboy. And the Niners are in a better spot. Kendricks is in a worse spot. So I like that the Niners ended up pivoting to Greenlaw. They also go out, they trade a 7th round pick for Malik Collins. And, you know, he's another really solid defensive player. He had a 13.9% pass rush win rate in 2023, which was 12th among interior players. Is he as good as Eric Armstead? No. But is he able to step in for Eric Armstead and be a capable starter? Certainly. Absolutely. You're not going to mistake him for Eric Armstead, but given how good the Niners are at developing defensive linemen and how good defensive linemen look when they come to the 49ers, who knows, maybe he will get confused with Eric Armstead from time to time in terms of their impact on the field. And I'm not saying that Malik Collins needs developed, obviously. I'm just saying the Niners have a habit of making defensive linemen look a little bit better than they actually are. So I'm excited to see how he'll step in. I think him and Hargrave as your 2 D tackles is a really, really nice pairing, with Bosa and Floyd as your 2 defensive ends. And then also you have Drake Jackson and Yetur Matos, who we'll talk about. Like, you're cooking. You're setting up a nice, solid defensive line. And then on the offensive side of the ball, they keep around Juwan Jennings, which is a big deal, especially considering Brandon Ayuk has a non-zero chance of getting traded. Probably a little bit higher than non-zero, but I'm trying to stay optimistic for the Niners fans out there. But the point is, Juwan Jennings, very, very capable 3rd receiver, 4th option in this offense. Well, 4th option's being a little disrespectful. Probably the 5th option, because you've got McCaffrey too, so. The point is, he's a very capable player, very selfless player, great blocker downfield, both in terms of, like, you know, if someone were to catch the ball behind him, he can run up and set a block on screens, on run plays. He's just kind of a do-it-all, big slot type of guy, and I'm glad the Niners managed to find a way to keep him around. They also go out and add Josh Dobbs, who, you know, if Brock Purdy is a quirked up white boy with a little bit of swag, Josh Dobbs, is the equivalent of that. He's a quirked up rocket scientist with a little bit of swag, right? So you've got a fun quarterback room now. Dobbs is a more than capable backup. So if anything were to happen to Purdy, knock on wood, then I think you'll be okay. And then moving to some of the other moves they made, adding in Jordan Elliott from the Cleveland Browns defensive tackle is a great move. He gets a 2-year deal worth $10 million. And, you know, him and Collins replacing Eric Armstead, I think is a really nice dynamic. You got a little bit of a thunder and lightning. Collins being more of the pass rusher, with Elliott being more of the run stuffer, right? Elliott had a 40% run stop win rate last year, which was 12th in the league. So they're about equal in terms of their talent as a run stuffer and a pass rusher, both like 11th or 12th in the league in terms of actually like doing what they're supposed to do, at least statistically last year. And I think that's a solid move. You know, paying him $5 million a year, not fully guaranteed, but roughly $5 million a year is a pretty solid deal. I think he's definitely worth that. They also add in Yetur Matos from the Carolina Panthers. He gets a 2-year deal. And he's someone who, you know, has never really caught on, but the Niners, they're a defensive line factory. It's like I already said, they find ways to make their defensive linemen look better. They find ways to, you know, develop defensive linemen. And I think Matos is somebody that has a lot of potential, can move across the defensive line. He just hasn't put it all together yet. And I think if any team's going to help him put it together, it's going to be the Niners. So this is a very like low risk, high reward type of move. You know, he's not been super productive. Again, hasn't really found his footing, but I think he can find it here with the 49ers. And then wrapping up the defensive moves here, they keep around Kevin Givens and Demetrius Flannigan-Fowles. Good to keep around your defensive depth for sure, especially when you have guys leaving, guys that are injured. You're trying to figure out what's going on there. You know, they lose Oren Burks. They lose a lot of defensive linemen. Good to keep those guys around. You add in Isaac Yiadom, who has, you know, he's a fine depth corner. Maybe he can find a way onto the field. I don't know. I think this is just a depth corner. Maybe doesn't make the roster. And then on special teams, you add in Ezekiel Turner and Chase Lucas, who have both been quality special teamers. it's pretty apparent that the Niners haven't been a huge fan of what's going on their special teams other than keeping around George Odom. So you add in two guys that have been capable special teamers for the Cardinals and the Lions. Both get one-year deals. Not a big commitment, but it's good to help out your special teams. And then offensively, it's just a lot of keeping their guys around. You know, Brandon Allen gets a contract. Sure, he's familiar with your offense. Chris Conley, he popped up last year as, again, another core special teamer. And he had, you know, the big catch against the Packers in the playoffs. He made some random big plays. So just keeping around another guy in your receiver room, can't be upset with that in the slightest. John Feliciano, we know their offensive line is paper thin, so you got to do something there. He's a capable offensive lineman. And then you add in Brandon Parker from the Raiders. He's basically just your Matt Pryor replacement. He's going to probably be a depth tackle. Ideally, maybe he can start, you know, if you're in a pinch, I think he can step up, but, you know, ideally he's going to be your Matt Pryor replacement, just a solid swing tackle. And then looking at their notable losses, there's nobody here that's like ruining the 49ers. The Niners aren't a substantially worse team for losing any of these guys. Yeah, losing Eric Armstead sucks, but again, with Malik Collins and Jordan Elliott coming in, I think they make up for the Eric Armstead size hole you're going to have on your defensive line. Javon Kinlaw leaving, you know, he just didn't catch on. You know, it sucks to say, but Kinlaw just never became much with the Niners, despite spending a top 20 pick on him. And then some of these other guys on defense, Clelin Ferrell, Randy Gregory, you can live without them. Chase Young, big name, sure, but like I said, I think Leonard Floyd is more than capable of stepping into the role he played. Warren Burks, Isaiah Oliver, whatever. And then offensively, losing Sam Darnold's a little bit tough, but you basically swap quarterbacks with the Vikings. You bring in Josh Dobbs, fine replacement there. The tight ends, Charlie Werner, Ross Dwelly. Those, I think, are kind of underrated losses, especially with Werner, who was a very capable tight end too. Played a little bit of like pseudo fullback when you wanted to give Kyle Juszczyk a breather. I think those two guys are replaceable. I haven't watched a whole lot of this year's tight end class, so I don't know if maybe there's someone they want to go out and try to get as a replacement for them. I have watched Jaheim Bell, and I think he could step in there, you know, if maybe they want to go target him, but I think Werner at least is an underrated loss for them. Matt Pryor, losing him is whatever. He's a swing offensive lineman, and we know the Niners' offensive line wasn't that great last year anyways. And Ray McLeod, you can stomach. So as a whole, I mean, the Niners didn't do anything crazy bad. They didn't do anything crazy good. But I think they did better than, like, you know, I said the Cardinals were kind of a baseline. Like, they did what they were expected to do. I think the Niners did pretty well, given what they had. So I'm going to give them a B+. You know, they didn't blow me away. They didn't change their franchise dramatically. But given what they were faced with in terms of losing a guy like Eric Armstead and, you know, some of the replacements they were able to bring in, keeping around Juwan Jennings, things like that, I think they did a damn fine job. Now, I will tell you right now, if Brandon Ayuk were to get traded anytime soon, that B+ would drop drastically, but that hasn't happened yet. Maybe it won't happen. In the world we're living in on 4/5/24, I'm going to give them a B+. I think they did pretty all right. And finally, with the Seattle Seahawks, this has been an interesting start to the offseason for them in terms of how they handled the initial, I keep wanting to say initial stages. We're a month into free agency at this point. I'm so behind on these videos, but, you know, in terms of how they've handled what's happened so far, it's been pretty interesting. Because they come out swinging, they cut Jamal Adams, they cut Quandre Diggs, leaving themselves with nothing at safety. Sure, they have Julian Love. I'm not moved by him, you know, who was it? He intercepted Jalen Hurts twice on a Monday night game, and everyone's like, yeah, that's the guy. No, I'm not moved by that. So you cut both your starting safeties, and I get it. Jamal Adams isn't himself anymore. Quandre Diggs is up there in age. You also lose Bobby Wagner, who isn't good anymore, so you can stomach that. But in terms of what they actually did, in, like with additions and retentions, I think they've done pretty okay. There is one glaring weakness still on this team, one glaring position that I'm a little upset they didn't attack. We'll talk about that. Starting off with the biggest move they made, in my opinion, and that's retaining Leonard Williams. You give him a 3-year, $64.5 million deal with $43.85 million guaranteed. And first of all, this makes that trade you made at midseason look a hell of a lot better. Because at first it was like, oh, you're trading to rent Leonard Williams for half a year. Now it's like, oh, okay, you wanted to extend him, you wanted to keep him around, you really believed he was going to be a big deal on your defensive line. And I'm cool with that. You know, Leonard Williams is a very solid 3-tech, or defensive end, depending on how this defense is ran. Obviously, he plays defensive end because it's a 3-4 defense. I knew that. I definitely didn't forget that for a moment. But I like that move a lot. You've got him paired with Draymond Jones down low, as well as Jaron Reed and Jonathan Hankins, who we'll talk about in a second. That's a good front rotation, right? Probably need a little bit of depth there, but in terms of the top talent, I think you're doing pretty all right. And then, like I said, you add in Jonathan Hankins, who's a very big and very capable defensive lineman. The Seahawks have had some issues over the past couple years with stopping the run, and that is all Jonathan Hankins does. He is one of the better, like, pure run defenders of the last, decade? You know, so I know he's up there in age, but, you know, it's a cheap deal, and he's going to come in to do one thing only, probably won't start, probably just going to be an early down guy that gets rotated off the defensive line as soon as it looks like the other team's going to throw. And I'm perfectly cool with that for them. I think that's a really solid signing. And then you move up to the second level of the defense. You lose Jordan Brooks, which sucks a lot, and we'll talk about that. But you add in Jerome Baker, who gets a 1-year, $7 million deal. And he's going to be more of your coverage linebacker, more of your Jordan Brooks replacement. I'm going to make a comparison here, and I promise it's not in terms of how good the player is, just the role he's going to play. This is your Roquan Smith for the next year, essentially. You know, you bring in Mike McDonald coming over from the Baltimore Ravens. He did wonders with a pass coverage linebacker and a run stuffer linebacker in the middle. Jerome Baker's your coverage guy. And, you know, again, he's not fantastic. He's not a superstar, but he's got 5 interceptions on his career, 22.5 sacks. He's only 27. This is kind of like a prove it deal. You know, he's trying to figure out where he's going to be for the end of his prime. Maybe it's Seattle. Maybe he figures it out. If he doesn't, you know, you're not investing a whole lot in him. It's a 1-year, $7 million deal, so you can stomach it if it doesn't work out. Go find a better athletic linebacker next offseason and run it back. But I like that move for the role he's going to serve. And then you go to the third level of the defense, and they bring in Rayshawn Jenkins to be their primary safety replacement. He gets a 2-year, $12 million deal. And I like Jenkins a lot. He's got 5 years of experience starting in the NFL, 10 career interceptions, 5 of which came in the past 2 years. He's not Diggs and he's not Adams. Completely different type of player. Adams was a blitzer. He was a downhill player, basically a linebacker. Diggs was a ball hawk. Jenkins is just kind of like a jack of all trades back there. He's a solid ball hawk. He's an okay blitzer. He's a solid run defender. He's solid in coverage. Like, he's just a solid starting safety. And to go from Diggs and Adams to at least having a safety net in place with Jenkins, who at worst is your starter, at best is probably your third safety after you go out and draft somebody, I think you're doing pretty okay, right? I think you could do a lot worse than Jenkins, so I like that move. And then the other big addition, or the other big move rather, I have listed here is retaining Noah Fant, who gets a 2-year, $21 million contract. If they start to actually use him, this can be pretty good. You know, last season he had, 43 targets last year, which is not great. And a lot of that wasn't necessarily his fault, wasn't necessarily even the scheme's fault. It was just the offensive line struggling and not being able to sustain drives and things like that. But I do think now that he's back and then Colby Parkinson and Will Dissly both leave, I think he's going to be in for a bigger role. Now, sure, it's a pretty decently sized contract, but he's still relatively young. He's only 26, and since he's gotten to Seattle, he hasn't missed a game. So I think this can be a very solid move. I think this can definitely work out for Seattle. Then we take a look at some of the other moves here. We'll start on defense since there's less to talk about. They bring in Tyrell Dodson, who gets a 1-year deal. He's going to step in as more of your run stuffer linebacker, right? More of your Patrick Queen role, so to speak. He's coming off a career high in tackles with 74, 2.5 sacks, 8 TFLs, all of those career highs. Like I said, he's 6 foot, 237 pounds, has 4.6 speed. He can run downhill. He can be a real good playmaker against the run, and he has a little bit of coverage flexibility too. So I think him and Baker are a good bang for your buck duo. I'm really upset for them that they couldn't retain Jordan Brooks, because Jordan Brooks is awesome. But I think this is a solid consolation prize. I think this is a solid, like, okay, that didn't work out, we got to pivot. Baker and Dodson, I think you could do a lot worse there at linebacker. So I like that. And then they also bring in Kayvon Wallace, who is, you know, probably more of your third safety as of right now. He's not a superstar safety by any means, but he's always found a role for himself. He's always found ways to get onto the field, and I'm sure he'll find ways to get onto the field in Seattle. And then also on defense, you retain Artie Burns, because why not? You know, he gets a 1-year deal. He's been a solid depth piece. He can step in, play different roles. He played a little bit of nickel last year. So, you know, a good versatile depth piece never hurt anybody. And then you also keep Darrell Taylor, which, sure, solid depth at edge rusher. He's, I would say, the 4th best edge in your room. And if he's the 4th best edge on your team, you're doing pretty okay. Not a great run defender, but he's okay as a depth player, I suppose. Not somebody I'm a huge fan of. He gets a 1-year deal that's pretty cheap, so I don't know how high the Seahawks are on him either. We'll have to see what the plan is, but I don't envision him being too big of an asset for the Seahawks. And then on offense, you go out and trade for Sam Howell, and sure, you know, I like Sam Howell. I still think there's something there. And whether you think there's something there or not, they gave up relatively nothing for him. He's going to be a solid backup. Maybe you think he can eventually be the successor to Geno, but either way, you get a chance to kind of like work with him and figure out if that's going to be possible. Can't complain there. You bring in Laviska Shenault, who hasn't done a whole lot of anything. He's a replacement for D. Eskridge, who I know Seahawks fans aren't a very big fan of. So at the very least, hopefully Shenault will be able to beat out Eskridge for like the, I don't know what role that would be in Seattle. The D. Eskridge role, the kind of traitsy receiver that fans hate, I guess. I don't know. You bring in Pharaoh Brown to be your backup tight end. He gets a 1-year deal, very little money to it. He's not anything special. He's a good number 3. He had a career high 208 yards and 1 touchdown last season, which, I mean, he's a fine tight end 3. I think you're pretty okay with him coming in. You bring in George Fant, who is a good swing tackle. He really struggled on the offensive line last year, especially with Abe Lucas's knee. So I think he's a better backup tackle, a better guy that can step in than Jake Curran and Stone Forsythe, or, you know, the husk of Jason Peters. So I like that move for them. You also bring in Nick Harris, who, according to ESPN, is slated to be the starter as of right now. I don't know if that'll be the case, but I guess he's capable of being a starting center, maybe. He's more of a fullback at this point in his career, so maybe the Seahawks want to try to bring that back. I doubt it. That doesn't seem like their MO, unfortunately, but, you know, Nick Harris on the roster. At the very least, he provides some competition for Olu Oluwatimi, and maybe that's the plan. Maybe you just want to light a fire under his ass and get him to step up. And then the other offensive move they make here, they add Tremaine Ankrum Jr., who I'm not going to pretend to know a damn thing about. He's started 1 game, apparently. So, take that as you will. Offensive line depth. But yeah, additions, retentions, I think they did a pretty solid job, given what they had to work with. And then in terms of losses, I already talked about Jordan Brooks. That's like the big one that really sucks. You cut Nick Bellore, who was making a lot of money, sure, but me being me, I'm going to be biased and say he's one of the better special teamers in the league, and cutting him maybe isn't a great idea. They don't play him at fullback anymore, though, so maybe he'll go somewhere where they'll actually use him the way he's meant to be used. You lose Drew Lock, but replacing him with Sam Howell, I think you're about even there. Losing Damian Lewis could suck, depending on how you attack the offensive line in the draft. You know, there's some really solid guards out there in this draft, and I honestly wouldn't be shocked if Seattle went offensive line with their first 2 picks. You know, go out, you get Jackson Powers-Johnson in the first round. That would be huge. Then go try to draft a guard, and I don't know where their second pick is, but wherever that lies, that would be awesome. But other than that, like, I think you can stomach your losses not named Jordan Brooks. Jamal Adams leaving isn't a big deal, and he could still hypothetically come back. Same thing with Quandre Diggs. They haven't gotten signed. Maybe Seattle, you know, right before the draft or after the draft is like, hey, we'll give you a couple million if you just want to come play. They'll be like, yeah, sure, why not? You know, if they can't land somebody in the draft or something like that. But as a whole, Seattle did fine. I'm going to give them a B. Again, another like pretty baseline free agency period. I'd honestly give them a B+ if they didn't lose Jordan Brooks. It's just so hard for me to get over them losing Jordan Brooks. I think that's a big loss for them. I think he would have been awesome with Mike McDonald, but otherwise, I think their defensive line got better. I think their linebacker core is going to survive. And I can't complain too much about their other moves, obviously. So the draft will be fun for this team. I really hope they attack the offensive line aggressively because they need it. But anyways, folks, that's going to do it for this installment of my grading every team 1 week into free agency series. I hope you all enjoyed. And if you did, please make sure to leave a like down below, as it does help out the channel a ton. Shows your support, shows you care. I really appreciate it. And also make sure to subscribe, because if I haven't covered your team yet, you won't want to miss when I do. And if I have covered your team already, go ahead and subscribe anyways, because we've got more great NFL content coming your way all the way throughout the offseason, into the regular season, and beyond. We're going to be talking about the draft. We're going to be talking about all the teams again after the draft. I'm going to be talking about all the teams again throughout the summer, mixed in with some film breakdowns and whatnot. You definitely won't want to miss that. Let me know down in the comments below what you thought about my grades for these teams. Was I a little too high on some players? Was I a little too low? Was I too harsh? Was I too kind? Anything in between? Please let me know down in the comments what you think. I'd love to sit and chat with you about what's going on around the league. But with all that being said, I hope you enjoyed. And to everyone out there watching, I hope you all have a wonderful day, evening, night, afternoon, whatever time of day it is for you. I hope you enjoy it, because you're all wonderful people and you deserve it.
Had a chance on the throwback. This was an ill-advised throw. What an unbelievable catch by Cole Kmet. And he cups it too. No movement when he hits the ground, tucked up against his shoulder. Wow.
Using that